What's up, guys? This is Nick from Arch City Poker, and in today's vlog, going to be continuing the How to Beat Live Low Stakes Poker series. Now, today's topic is going to be donk betting, an action that is very frowned upon by the majority of the poker community. I think as far as executing a donk bet, there are definitely times where I think it's more optimal. It's optimal compared to check calling or check raising. I also think facing a donk bet is often very weird for players at these stakes, and they don't know what it means a lot of times. And so I'm going to talk about some different player types briefly and kind of discuss what I think the donk bet means as far as their range is concerned. And then I'm going to get into executing a donk bet and maybe give you guys two examples of, I think good spots where you should consider a donk bet very seriously. So as far as facing a donk bet, I'm not going to get into how to counter these bets and what I think they mean. I think that could be done in a whole nother vlog possibly. So if you guys have questions or comments on how to possibly counter these different player types when I get into them in a sec here, let me know in the comment section and I can maybe give you guys a little insight there. But as far as this vlog, I think it'll run well over 10 minutes if I get into counters, and I want to keep these a little bit shorter just for the sake of everyone's time. So player dependent. I think that facing a donk bet is very player dependent. Let's say you have an unknown opponent, I would say in these games more often than not, it's going to be like weak top pair combos, top pair stuff that these opponents feel are a little bit vulnerable and they would like to protect and maybe get some thin value out of immediately. Sometimes nuttish combos, but not as often. Most players are often taught that you should be checking to the pre-flop raiser, which is somewhat of a misconception to begin with. Initiative does not matter like people think it does in poker, but I do think that they often are checking to the pre-flop raiser, especially with their nuttish combos, looking for check raise or looking to slow play. So it's often going to be like weaker top pair stuff that they feel they need a little protection for, I think. Now, facing nits or like really tight players, on the other hand, I would say definitely be a little more cautious. I rarely, if ever, have seen a nit lead something that's not top pair, top kicker plus in these spots. They are very afraid of facing raises and huge bet sizes. They don't want to stack off and felt non-nuttish hands, so I don't think they're going to be leading into you guys with like top pair, third kicker type of stuff. So be very aware of when these guys lead into you, especially on dry boards and with large bet sizes, because they're going to be very polarized in those spots. Usually a very unbalanced polarized range. It's usually going to be super value heavy with like no bluffs. So be very mindful of that. Facing a fish or like a really loose or bad player, I've seen everything from like third pair to draws to air. Let's say on a flop texture like Jack 6 deuce, I've seen pocket fours lead just for protection and just because they think they have the best hand. Although that's kind of a flawed way to think about that combo in that spot. But I would definitely say with these players, you can probably, well, like I said, I don't want to get into counters, so I'm not going to. But just overall, I think that's what these bets mean from these different player types. Now, as far as like tag or lag players like tight aggressive or loose aggressive go, they've read so many poker books and read forums and stuff to where donk betting, like I said, is so frowned upon that I don't think you hardly ever see it from them. If you do, I think it's probably safe to say it's similar to like facing an unknown player. I think it's probably a hand that's a little more vulnerable, a hand that they want to get some thin value out of that needs a little protection. Sometimes it'll be nuttish combos, but I don't think that often. So definitely keep this all in mind. I would say the most important thing to keep in mind with these live low stakes games is bet sizing with these donk bets. If you face like a third pot donk bet a lot of times, it's going to be what it is. It's going to be quite weak. You can probably, to give you guys a quick counter strategy, you can probably attack that pretty relentlessly. If you face a pot-sized donk bet, though, this is often going to be very unbalanced towards very nuttish combos. So just be mindful of bet sizing and the flop texture. Just be very mindful of that when facing these donk bets. Now, when to execute a donk bet, I think generally when you have a huge range advantage, which is not often the case out of position, but when you have a huge range advantage and or your opponent just has a really weak and wide range on most flop textures, I would say that's definitely a spot to consider a balanced, polarized donk betting strategy. So what I mean by that is, let's say quickly for an example, let's say the button opens to 5x and you decide to flat with ace queen suited. A combo you can certainly 3-bet with, but let's say this opponent makes it 5x. That's a large pre-flop sizing. You decide to call with a very strong and linear range of combos out of the small blind. And you see a flop heads up and it's ace jack 5 with 2 diamonds and you don't have a diamond in your hand. I think this is a spot that you should very seriously consider donk betting. I think that check calling allows your opponent to often check back a lot of hands that he would call a bet with. I think that even though it's a board texture that a lot of opponents may over c-bet, I think check raising is, especially in live games with often deeper stacks, it's going to be a little tricky for you. You're starting to make it a little expensive with that specific combo. Like ace queen is quite strong versus his wide and weak range, but it's not a combo that I want him to continue with me onto the turn with the stronger portion of his raise. See, that's the thing is, when you guys face a check, or when you execute a check raise and your opponent continues with you, he's often continuing with only half or like less than half of his range, and it's often going to be much, much stronger. Now, if you lead in this spot because you have a hand that's so strong compared to his range, like you're very often not beat in this spot. I think that he's continuing much wider, and you're going to get a lot more of his weaker combos to continue. Like on ace jack 5, he may check back jack 10, but he probably is going to call a bet if you go ahead and lead into him. So I do think that donk betting in that specific spot is quite optimal. I think overall what donk betting does in these spots is that, like, from a psychological standpoint, it makes you tougher to play against. It messes with the flow of the game. Your opponents will not know really how to defend against it. If you have a loose opponent in the cutoff or in the button in the spot, they may think to themselves, well, he bet into the pre-flop raiser. He doesn't know what he's doing. I'm going to punish him. And that may induce a spaz play for them. And then that will often negate their positional advantage, because then they're bloating the pot on a very early street, which in theory is better for you out of position. The less money that's behind out of position, the easier it is to play from out of position. So I think that those things that I stated make donk betting pretty optimal in this spot. I think that often with check calling and going for check raising, there's going to be spots, like I said, where you allow free cards to peel off. You allow your opponent in position to play a pretty easy strategy and not feel like they're indifferent to what you're doing. They have like complete control of the hand pretty much at that point. So to give you guys another quick example of when I would execute a donk bet, and it's similar to the last one. I would say definitely you'd have a range advantage in the spot, but let's say you have an opponent who likes to limp from up front, or like a middle position with a lot of like implied odds hands, like, suited connectors, like small and medium pairs. And then let's say they raise it's going to be unbalanced, obviously, but let's say they raise like suited broadways and like bigger pairs. Let's say you have an opponent in middle position that raises to 4x, we'll say he raises. And let's say you flatten the big blind with a hand like 7-6 suited. And that could be argued that that's a little loose in that spot, but against his raising range, that hand will play pretty well. Now, let's say the flop comes 6-5-4 with, let's say it's two-tone with like spades, and you have 7-6 of diamonds, and there's one diamond on the flop, so you have backdoor diamonds, you have top pair, and you have an open-ender. So pretty good hand for you. This is a spot where I see players auto checking to the pre-flop raiser. The thing is, the pre-flop raiser, if they're a thinking opponent at all, they're going to be thinking, well, I don't hit this board all that often. This board will hit the big blind pretty well a good amount of the time, even though his range is kind of wide. So they may check back a lot here. And it allows them to play pretty easily. They can then go for possibly 2 streets of value with like their overpairs, or if they turn like top pair. I think this is a spot you should seriously consider a donk bet. You can rep many nuttish combos on this board, hands that are also, and what I mean by nuttish combos, I am definitely saying like 2 pair plus, but also you're going to have very strong pair plus draw, or just very strong draw hands on this board texture. And your opponent's, like I said, he's not going to hit it that hard. his range is just not going to hit that flop texture all that hard. So I do think this is a spot where leading out can be quite optimal for you. You're going to put your opponent in a tough spot, and it's just going to make them kind of indifferent to anything you do. Now, for example, like that combo might seem kind of easy. Like, well, it's, Nick, I have top pair, I have an open ender, I have backdoor diamonds. That's a pretty easy one. Well, let's say on that same 6-5-4 with two spades that you have king, queen of spades. I think this is often a very good combo to go ahead and throw into a lead as well. It's technically a semi-bluff. You have the flush draw, you have the two overcards, but also the nice thing about having that king and queen is you block combos of kings and queens in that spot. So I think this makes for a pretty good donk bet to help balance out when you're leading your value combo. So I can see that the vlog is getting a little bit longer than 10 minutes, and because of that, I'll try to wrap it up here. But I would say, in general, facing a donk bet, just keep in mind those player types, like I said, and what those donk bets can mean. And just try to think for yourselves logically, like how you would best counter their strategies then, how to best exploit those opponents. And as far as executing the donk bets, like I said, I would say that use a very balanced but polarized range. I would say keep in mind that if you think you have the range advantage compared to your opponent's usually weaker and wider range on these flop textures, I would definitely consider donk betting opposed to check calling and check raising. And this is something that it might take you guys a little bit to wrap your head around. I still will admit I don't have it fully figured out yet as far as like donk betting in these spots, but I have found out that I think it is more optimal to often go ahead and just take the lead in these spots. So if you guys have any questions or comments, definitely let me know in the comment section, and I'll definitely try to respond as quickly and as efficiently as I can. If you guys would like me to do like a part 2 on how to counter these player types when you're facing donk bets and how to best exploit them, I can probably whip something up for you guys. But until then, this is Nick from Arch City Poker. Take care.